Jody Harper had long dreamed of a vacation, a brief escape from the relentless demands of single parenthood and the gnawing grief that had become her constant companion since her husband Bernard's death. Raising her two children, Kevin and Leela, alone had left her little time for herself. But the promise of warm sands and ocean breezes at a California resort had finally drawn her from her everyday routines. Kevin and Leela, brimming with excitement, couldn't wait to explore the beach. The moment they arrived, the children raced ahead, their laughter echoing across the sunlit sands. Jody followed more slowly, allowing herself a moment to breathe in the salty air and listen to the rhythmic lapping of the waves. "Mama, look at this seashell," Leela called out, her small hands holding up a pink, spiraled treasure. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Jody replied, smiling at her daughter's joy. For a fleeting moment, she felt a semblance of peace. As the children played, Jody realized she hadn't brought any drinks. "Stay right here, where I can see you," she instructed Kevin and Leela. "I'm going to get us some lemonade." Kevin, his face already glowing from the sun, gave her a thumbs up. "Okay, Mom." Jody walked towards the lemonade stand, savoring the feeling of the warm sand beneath her feet. When she reached the booth, she was startled by a sudden and profound sense of déjà vu. The man behind the counter, in his branded apron and baseball cap, looked up with a polite smile. "What can I get for you, ma'am?" he asked. Jody's heart skipped a beat. The face, the voice, it was Bernard. Her Bernard. She stood there, unable to speak, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The vendor, noticing her shock, grew concerned. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Jody finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. "Bernard, is that you?" The man's friendly expression faltered. "I'm sorry, you must have me confused with someone else. My name is Stephen." Before Jody could respond, a visibly pregnant woman approached, her tone brusque. "Stephen, what's taking so long? You've got customers waiting." Jody's eyes darted between the two of them. I need to go," she stammered, feeling dizzy. She hurried away, her thoughts racing. Back at the beach, Kevin and Leela were still playing, oblivious to their mother's turmoil. Jody handed them the lemonade, her hands trembling. "Mom, are you okay?" Kevin asked, noticing her unease. "Yes, sweetie, I'm fine," Jody replied, forcing a smile. "I just need to sit down for a bit." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Jody couldn't shake the image of Bernard, no Stephen, working at the lemonade stand. How could it be possible? Her husband had died in a car crash 2 years ago. She had mourned him, buried him, yet the man she had seen was undeniably him. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, Jody sat on the balcony of their hotel room, staring at the moonlit ocean. She had to know the truth. She had to see him again. The next morning, Jody returned to the beach, positioning herself where she could discreetly watch the lemonade stand. Hours passed, the sun climbing high in the sky before Stephen finally ended his shift. She followed him at a distance, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Stephen led her to a quaint house covered in ivy, not far from the beach. Jody hesitated at the door, then knocked softly. The pregnant woman from the beach, Sally, opened it, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What do you want?" Sally demanded. "I need to talk to Stephen. Please, it's important," Jody pleaded. Sally glanced over her shoulder, then called, "Stephen, someone's here to see you." Stephen appeared, looking puzzled but polite. "Yes." Jody took a deep breath. "Bernard, it's me, Jody, your wife." Stephen's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. My name is Stephen." "No, you're Bernard Harper. You had an accident 2 years ago." "They told me you died," Jody insisted, her voice shaking. Sally stepped forward, her expression a mix of anger and fear. "What are you talking about?" Jody took another deep breath and began to tell them everything. The accident, the funeral, the grief that had consumed her life. Stephen listened, his confusion deepening. "I don't remember any of this," he said finally, looking to Sally for support. "I had an accident, yes, but Sally found me. I had no memory of who I was." Jody looked at Sally, who seemed torn between anger and fear. "Please, I just want to know the truth. If he's happy here, I won't interfere, but I need to know." Sally's resolve crumbled. "I found him on the side of the road, injured and with no memory. I didn't take him to the hospital because I was lonely. I thought I could build a life with him." Stephen's eyes widened in shock. Sally, how could you? Tears streaming down her face, Sally whispered. I was afraid of being alone again. I'm so sorry, Stephen. Bernard, whoever you are. Jody reached out, her voice gentle but firm. We need to figure this out together, for all our sakes. Stephen, Bernard, nodded slowly. Yes, we do. We need to understand what really happened. As they stood there, the three of them united by a web of confusion and emotion, Jody felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but at least now she was no longer alone in seeking the truth. The revelation of Stephen's true identity left a charged silence hanging in the air. Jody Bernard, now confused about his name, and Sally stood awkwardly in the modest living room of the ivy-covered house. The room was filled with a mixture of apprehension, hope, and fear as they began the delicate process of untangling the threads of the past. Bernard, who was starting to piece together fragments of his past, sat down heavily on the worn-out sofa. He looked at Jody with a mixture of recognition and bewilderment. I remember flashes, bits and pieces, he said, his voice strained. But it's like trying to catch smoke. Jody nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. It's okay. We'll figure this out together. She turned to Sally, who sat stiffly on the edge of a chair. Sally, can you tell us everything you remember from the day you found him? Sally took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. It was 2 years ago, late at night. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Utah when I saw a man lying by the side of the road. He was badly injured, unconscious. I panicked. I should have taken him to a hospital, but I was scared and lonely, so I brought him home instead. Bernard looked at her, his expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. You saved my life, but why didn't you take me to the authorities? Why lie? Sally's eyes filled with tears. I thought I could take care of you. You didn't remember anything, and I was desperate for company. I made up a life for us. It was wrong, and I'm so sorry. Jody, sensing the emotional turmoil in the room, spoke softly. Sally, we appreciate that you took care of him. But now we need to know more. Bernard, do you remember anything about the accident? Anything at all? Bernard rubbed his temples, trying to force the memories to surface. I remember picking up a hitchhiker. He seemed harmless at first, but then there was an argument. I don't remember why, but he attacked me. Everything after that is a blur until I woke up in Sally's house. Jody clenched her fists, anger boiling up inside her. The hitchhiker must have stolen your car and crashed it. That's why they thought you were dead. Bernard nodded slowly. It makes sense, but why didn't anyone look for me? Why didn't the police find out what really happened? Jody sighed, her shoulders sagging. They must have assumed the body in the car was you. The fire destroyed everything, and the case was closed too quickly. I never believed it, though. I always felt there was something wrong. Sally, her voice barely above a whisper, added, I was selfish. I didn't want to lose you, Bernard. I knew that if I took you to the authorities, they'd find out who you were, and you'd go back to your old life. I convinced myself it was better this way. The room fell silent again as they absorbed the weight of her words. Jody looked at Bernard, her eyes pleading. We need to go to the police and tell them everything. They need to know the truth, and we need to make sure this never happens again. Bernard nodded, determination hardening his features. You're right. It's time to set things straight. Sally, tears streaming down her face, stood up. I'll come with you. I owe you that much at least. At the police station, the trio arrived at the local police station, a modest building that buzzed with activity. They were greeted by a middle-aged officer with a kind face. How can I help you? He asked, noticing their tense expressions. Bernard took a deep breath and stepped forward. My name is Bernard Harper. 2 years ago, I was reported dead after a car crash. But I didn't die. I lost my memory and have been living under a different identity. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. That's quite a story. Let's sit down and you can tell me everything. In the interrogation room, Bernard, Jody, and Sally recounted their tale. The officer listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. So you picked up a hitchhiker and he attacked you? The officer asked, looking up from his notepad. Yes, Bernard confirmed. I can't remember his face, but I remember the struggle. He must have taken my car and crashed it. The officer nodded. That explains a lot. We found a body in the car, but it was so badly burned we couldn't make a positive ID. Given the circumstances, we assumed it was you, Mr. Harper. Jody leaned forward, her voice urgent. We need to reopen the case. The real criminal is still out there. The officer nodded. We'll look into it immediately. And Mr. Harper, we'll need to take your statement and run some checks to confirm your identity. But I'm sure everything will clear up. Sally, who had been silent for most of the conversation, spoke up. I want to take responsibility for my actions. I kept Bernard from his family, and I know that was wrong. The officer gave her a sympathetic look. We'll need to take your statement as well, ma'am. Given the circumstances, the court will decide the appropriate course of action. As the formalities were completed, Bernard looked at Jody, a mix of relief and gratitude in his eyes. Thank you for finding me, for believing in me. Jody squeezed his hand. I never gave up on you, Bernard. And now we can start to heal. With the past beginning to unravel, Bernard and Jody felt a sense of closure. There were still challenges ahead, but together they could face them. And for the first time in 2 years, they had hope for the future. The days following the visit to the police station were a whirlwind of emotions and legal proceedings. Bernard, Jody, and Sally found themselves caught in a maelstrom of paperwork, interviews, and investigations. The authorities were thorough, and as Bernard's true identity was confirmed, the case of his supposed death was reopened. Meanwhile, Sally's actions were scrutinized, and it was decided that she would undergo psychological evaluation to determine the extent of her culpability and mental health condition. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of relief and progress. Bernard's memory was slowly returning, and with each fragment that surfaced, he felt more like his old self. Jody stood by him, offering unwavering support, while Sally faced the consequences of her actions with a mix of fear and remorse. A confrontation unfolds. One evening, Jody and Bernard were sitting in their hotel room, discussing the next steps. Kevin and Leela were playing in the adjoining room, their laughter a comforting backdrop to the serious conversation. We've come so far, Bernard. I'm just grateful to have you back, Jody said, her voice tinged with emotion. Bernard reached out and took her hand. I'm grateful too, Jody. I can't imagine what you and the kids went through. I'm sorry for all the pain my disappearance caused. Jody squeezed his hand reassuringly. It wasn't your fault. What matters is that we're together now and we can start to rebuild our lives. Their tender moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. Bernard frowned and went to answer it, revealing Sally standing there, her face pale and drawn. Sally, what's wrong? Bernard asked, concern in his voice. Sally's eyes were filled with tears. I just wanted to see you one last time before everything changes. I know I can't undo what I did, but I needed to apologize again and to say goodbye. Jody stepped forward, her expression softening. Sally, we know you didn't mean any harm. You need to get help, and we need to move on with our lives. Sally nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I understand. I'm so sorry. Bernard pulled Sally into a gentle embrace. Take care of yourself, Sally. Get the help you need. Maybe one day things will be different. As Sally left, Jody closed the door and turned to Bernard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I hope she finds peace. Bernard nodded. So do I. The final confrontation. The next day, Jody and Bernard took the kids to the beach for some much-needed relaxation. Kevin and Leela, thrilled to have their father back, splashed in the waves and built sandcastles, their laughter filling the air. While the children played, Jody and Bernard sat on the sand, watching them. It's amazing how resilient they are, Bernard said, his voice filled with admiration. Jody smiled. They get that from you. Suddenly, their peaceful moment was shattered by a commotion nearby. Turning towards the source of the noise, they saw Sally, her face twisted in anger, marching towards them with a kitchen knife clutched in her hand. Bernard, if I can't have you, no one can, she screamed, her voice hysterical. Bernard jumped to his feet, positioning himself between Sally and the children. Sally, put the knife down. This isn't you. You need help. Jody grabbed the kids, pulling them behind her. Stay back, kids. Everything will be okay. Sally lunged at Bernard, but he sidestepped her, grabbing her wrist and twisting it until the knife fell to the ground. Sally crumpled, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she cried. Bernard knelt beside her, holding her shoulders firmly. Sally, it's over. You need to let go and get the help you need. By then, other beachgoers had noticed the commotion and called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived and took Sally into custody. As they led her away, she looked back at Bernard and Jody, her eyes filled with regret and sorrow. Rebuilding together, with Sally safely in custody and her future to be determined by the courts, Bernard and Jody focused on their family. They spent the rest of their vacation enjoying the beach, creating new memories, and beginning the process of healing. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Bernard and Jody sat on the balcony of their hotel room, watching the waves. "Do you think we'll ever really be able to move past this?" Bernard asked, his voice thoughtful. Jody leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "I think we already are. It's not going to be easy, but we have each other, and we have our children. That's all that matters." Bernard nodded, wrapping his arm around her. "You're right. Together, we can face anything." As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, they felt a sense of peace and hope for the future. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it hand in hand as a family. And with each passing day, the pain of the past faded a little more, replaced by the promise of a brighter tomorrow.